In the heart of rural Pennsylvania stands a decaying brick building that the locals dare not enter. Its windows are sealed by time, its halls heavy with silence. But once, those halls rang with laughter. In 1901, St. Hildegard's Orphanage was home to 12 forgotten children and one woman who swore she'd save them from the world's cruelty. Then one rain-soaked night, every child vanished, without a sound, without a trace. No graves, no records, just the faint echo of voices drifting through empty rooms, calling for help that never came. More than a century later, no one knows what really happened there, or why. St. Hildegard's Orphanage began as a vision of compassion, or at least, that was how it was presented to the parish in 1894. Its founder, Sister Agnes Vale, was a woman born of sorrow and faith, an orphan herself raised by the church after a fire claimed her family. Her face, as described in parish records, was calm but unyielding, her eyes carrying both conviction and exhaustion. She believed that suffering purified the soul, and that children, abandoned and unwanted, were chosen by God to endure and overcome. It was this belief that would shape every stone, rule, and whisper within the orphanage's walls. The land for St. Hildegard's was donated by a wealthy widow who insisted her name remain undisclosed. It stood on the outskirts of Bracken Hollow, a remote, mist-drenched valley where trees grew thick enough to block out the sun. The nearest town was several miles away, and the road leading in was more dirt than path. Locals questioned why an orphanage would be built so far from civilization, but Sister Agnes welcomed the isolation. She wrote that it allowed the children to hear only God's voice and not the noise of man. Construction began that same spring. The building was designed in stark Gothic fashion, high ceilings, narrow windows, and long, echoing halls. Even during its completion, workers reported unease, tools vanishing overnight, footprints appearing in fresh cement, and one laborer who swore he heard children laughing though none had yet arrived. When questioned, Sister Agnes dismissed the stories as the devil's distraction. But privately, her letters revealed concern over what she called the temperament of the land. By the winter of 1895, the first orphans were brought in, 12 children between the ages of 6 and 13, each carrying their own tragedy. There was Thomas Hale, who had watched his parents die in a mining explosion, Eleanor Voss, abandoned by a traveling circus, and the Blakely twins, whose mother was found drowned in the river. Sister Agnes greeted each child with the same stiff affection. No hugs, only a hand on the head and a whispered prayer. Discipline at St. Hildegard's was rigid. The children rose at dawn, prayed before meals, and were forbidden to speak after sunset. Sister Agnes believed silence strengthened faith, but some of the older children whispered that she wasn't alone at night, that someone else walked the halls after curfew. The orphanage staff consisted of only 2 nuns besides Agnes, Sister Ruth, who managed the kitchen, and Sister Miriam, who kept the ledgers. Both women left abruptly after less than a year, their departure unrecorded. Despite the unease, the orphanage operated efficiently. Reports sent to the church praised Sister Agnes's devotion and impeccable order. Yet those same reports contained subtle inconsistencies. The number of children listed often changed. Donors' names were blacked out, and one entry mentioned a private room of reflection, not included in the official plans. It was there, many believe, that St. Hildegard's story began to twist into something else entirely. The orphanage's isolation was both deliberate and unnatural. St. Hildegard stood on land that locals once called the Widow's Acre, a stretch of cold, uneven ground where nothing grew straight. Even before the building rose, travelers spoke of strange stillness there, birds refusing to perch, animals circling wide around the clearing. Sister Agnes claimed the silence was sacred, that it made prayer stronger, but to the townsfolk, it felt more like a warning. The road to the orphanage wound through miles of fog-drenched forest, the kind where daylight struggled to reach the soil. It was a place designed to be forgotten, tucked far from the eyes of those who might ask too many questions. The matter of funding was equally strange. Church archives note that the diocese approved the orphanage's operation, but not its full construction costs. Yet records show steady payments, large sums from accounts that led nowhere. The letters accompanying these donations were signed only with a single symbol, a cross encircled by 12 small dots. When the bishop inquired, Sister Agnes replied that the benefactors wished anonymity, that they were servants of the Lord who preferred deeds over recognition. The church, eager for charitable expansion, did not press further, but others noticed the odd timing. Each donation arrived exactly 1 day after a child was admitted. Villagers speculated endlessly. Some believed the donors were wealthy widows atoning for sins. Others whispered of a secret society funding religious sanctuaries for chosen children. A retired priest, Father Callahan, claimed the money was laundered from a dissolved spiritualist order that once operated in Pittsburgh, a group obsessed with the idea of communicating with divine intermediaries through children's voices. When he tried to verify it, the trail went cold. Every name connected to the orphanage's financing vanished from public record. Inside St. Hildegard's, the children knew nothing of this. They only knew that new packages often arrived without sender names, boxes of candles, rosaries carved from bone, and books in languages none of them could read. Sister Agnes treated these deliveries with reverence. She stored them in a locked cabinet near the chapel and forbade anyone to touch them. Late at night, when the lamps burned low, she would take the packages out one by one and pray aloud in a tongue that was not Latin, though it had its rhythm. Some children claimed to hear whispers responding to her prayers, soft voices that came from beneath the floor. The orphanage's isolation began to weigh on those inside. Weeks would pass without a visitor. The nearest parish priest had fallen ill, leaving the building entirely under Agnes's supervision. She stopped writing to the diocese, and instead began corresponding with someone whose letters bore no return address. Her handwriting grew frantic, her language cryptic. Phrases like, "The offering nears completion," and "They are listening now." By then, the fog that surrounded the orphanage seemed thicker than ever, clinging to the windows as though the forest itself was trying to keep the building hidden from the world. As winter crept into 1900, the atmosphere inside St. Hildegard's began to shift from silent discipline to something darker, something that even the youngest children could sense. The laughter that once echoed through the long corridors grew scarce. Meals were eaten in uneasy quiet, interrupted only by the scraping of spoons on tin plates. The air grew cold even when fires burned in the hearth, and a faint metallic smell, like rust or old blood, seemed to hang in the dormitories. Sister Agnes told the children that they were being tested by the Lord, but her own face betrayed exhaustion. She had grown thinner, her eyes ringed with sleepless shadows, her voice distant as if she were speaking from somewhere far away. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of illness. One by one, the children began to fall sick, pale, feverish, whispering nonsense in their sleep. Dr. Edmund Lyle was summoned from the nearest town, and after his visit he refused to return, claiming the building's air was unwholesome and that the matron's behavior unsettled him. His notes described the children's condition as symptoms inconsistent with any known ailment, yet Sister Agnes insisted it was divine purification. She forbade medicine, saying prayer would cleanse what science could not. At night, strange noises echoed through the halls, the sound of small feet running where no child was awake, doors creaking open though they had been locked. A few of the older children, huddled together under blankets, whispered that they saw figures in the courtyard, children like themselves, but too pale, standing still in the rain. When they told Sister Agnes, she punished them with silent reflection in the chapel. Afterward, they refused to speak again, even when the other children begged them to explain what they had seen. Whispers spread among the townsfolk as well. A farmer who delivered milk claimed he heard faint singing from the orphanage yard long after midnight. Another reported seeing candlelight in the woods, 12 small flames moving in a slow, deliberate circle. Word reached the church, but when a visiting cleric came to inspect, Sister Agnes greeted him calmly, her demeanor serene, her building immaculate. The children, lined up neatly in their uniforms, said nothing. The cleric wrote that he found no reason for concern. By early spring, the strangeness deepened. The walls began to bear faint markings, chalk drawings that appeared overnight, crude shapes of eyes, wells, and something that looked like a hand reaching upward. Sister Agnes claimed the children had done it, yet none admitted to it. Her journal from that period survives in fragments, its entries increasingly disjointed. They hear the whispers under the well, the soil trembles when they pray, the children hum to keep it asleep. The final entry before the storm reads only one line, written with trembling ink. It wants all 12. The remaining nuns left without explanation that same week. The children were never seen outside the orphanage again. The night of the storm arrived without warning, a violent upheaval that seemed to fall directly from a furious sky. On February 9th, 1901, the valley of Bracken Hollow was swallowed by thunder and sheets of rain so heavy that the road to St. Hildegard's disappeared beneath rushing water. The few villagers who lived near the ridge said lightning struck the orphanage tower again and again, each flash illuminating the trees like fleeting skeletons. Inside, the children were huddled together in the main hall, clutching candles that sputtered in the drafts. Sister Agnes moved among them, calm at first, then trembling as the night deepened. According to fragments found later in her torn journal, she believed the storm was a cleansing, a sign that the voices beneath the earth had come to collect what was promised. The children had not slept for days. They said the man from the well was calling to them, whispering their names in the rhythm of the rain. Sister Agnes led them in prayer, chanting verses over and over until the thunder nearly drowned her out. The chapel bell rang once, though the tower had been struck hours earlier and no one had touched the rope. A witness from the nearby farm claimed he saw light bursting through the orphanage windows just before midnight. Bright white, then deep red, as though fire had erupted inside, yet no smoke followed. When the storm finally broke toward dawn, the building was eerily intact, the rain washing the valley clean of footprints, wagon tracks, everything. The first person to enter the next morning was Sister Margaret, a visiting nun sent to deliver supplies. She found the heavy front doors wide open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, the air was still and cold. Every bed in the dormitory was perfectly made, each pillow fluffed, each blanket smoothed. The children's shoes were neatly lined along the wall, 12 pairs in total, each slightly damp as though worn recently. Their bowls sat untouched on the dining table, filled with water instead of food. The only sound came from the chapel, where Sister Agnes knelt before the altar. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her lips moving in silence. Around her, the candles had burned to stubs. When authorities arrived 2 days later, they found no trace of the missing children. The building showed no sign of forced entry or escape. The doors had been locked from the inside, the windows sealed. Inspector James Alcott examined every corner, even the grounds near the well. He noted the presence of 12 small depressions in the soil beside it, perfectly round, as if something had once been there and vanished. On the wall nearby were faint streaks of mud, shaped like hands pressed against stone. By dusk, the inspector left to fetch lanterns from his horse. He never returned. His tracks led halfway into the forest and stopped at the same place the light had been seen the night before. The disappearance of Inspector James Alcott marked a turning point in the story of St. Hildegard's. What began as a routine investigation into missing children soon became a mystery that the authorities themselves wished to bury. Alcott had been known as a rational man, the kind who dismissed superstition and demanded evidence. Before his disappearance, he had sent a single telegram to his superior. "There are things here I cannot classify. The matron is not alone." That message was received at 7:42 p.m. on February 13th, the same night he vanished. When search parties combed the area the next morning, they found his horse tied to a tree near the well, reins still looped neatly, as though waiting for his return. His lantern lay nearby, its flame long extinguished, but the glass remained warm to the touch. For several weeks afterward, investigators from neighboring counties were brought in, though few stayed long. The reports that survived from that period read more like confessions than official records. One deputy wrote that he heard children laughing inside the sealed building when he walked the perimeter. Another described finding a rosary half buried in the mud, its crucifix carved backward. The sheriff, unwilling to risk his men further, ordered the property closed, and the remaining staff relocated under church supervision. Sister Agnes, still catatonic, was sent to a convent hospital in Maryland, where she spent her remaining years in silence. When she finally spoke again, nearly a decade later, her first words were, "He took them because they answered." In the absence of official resolution, rumors filled the void. Locals claimed the inspector's notebook was discovered months later by a logging crew several miles from the orphanage, wedged inside the hollow of a dead tree. Its pages were water-damaged, most illegible, but the few that could be read were disturbing. They contained sketches of symbols found beneath the chapel floor, circles intersected by uneven lines, each containing 12 dots arranged in a spiral. In the margins, Alcott had written, "They matched the donor's seal." Another line read, "The children were being prepared, not protected." The church quickly seized the evidence, declaring the entire matter closed. Publicly, they blamed the tragedy on a flood that had swept the orphans away, though no flood had been reported in Bracken Hollow that year. Privately, many priests refused to visit the site. One, Father Thomas Burke, later admitted in a private letter that he saw lights moving within the building during his inspection. Faint blue glows flickering through. The upper windows, despite the structure being locked and abandoned. By the end of 1902, St. Hildegard's name had been erased from diocesan records. Locals began referring to it only as the Hollow House. The surrounding woods grew thick again, swallowing the old road. People stopped going near it, especially after two boys exploring the grounds claimed they found 12 small stones laid in a ring near the well, each carved with a child's name. The sheriff had the stones removed, but by the next morning, the ring had reappeared exactly as before. By the 1950s, St. Hildegard's Orphanage had become a ghost story told around bar counters and campfires. Few believed it was real anymore, until a group of developers from Philadelphia arrived with plans to turn the ruins into a private boarding school. They saw opportunity in its isolation and charm, ignoring the warnings of locals who still refused to step past the overgrown gates. The building, half collapsed and strangled by ivy, stood like a wounded monument. Inside, everything was coated in dust and moss, the air thick with the smell of rot and candle wax. Yet beneath the decay, much of it remained strangely preserved. The beds still lined the walls in perfect symmetry. The dining room table sat intact, a single iron plate resting at its center, as if waiting for a meal that never came. Construction began in the spring of 1953. Workers tore away the warped floors and rebuilt the chapel roof. But soon strange accidents began to occur. Tools went missing overnight and were later found arranged in neat circles. One carpenter broke his wrist after tripping over something buried just beneath the chapel's altar. A hollow cavity sealed with stone. When the crew pried it open, the stench that poured out was overwhelming. Inside lay a narrow crawl space no taller than 3 feet, its walls covered in scratches. The foreman, assuming it to be an old drainage passage, ordered it cleared. But before the men could begin, they noticed what looked like wooden carvings. 12 small chairs, each no larger than a child's seat, arranged in a perfect ring. None of them were rotted. Beneath each chair was a symbol carved into the dirt, a circle surrounded by 12 tiny dots. That night, the foreman, Henry Lawton, took one of the chairs home, intending to restore it as a keepsake. 2 days later, he was found dead in his garage. The chair shattered beside him, his face frozen in an expression of terror. His wife claimed she heard children laughing just before she discovered him. The other workers refused to return to the site. The project was abandoned, and the property sealed once more under the supervision of county officials. Local newspapers briefly covered the story, calling it an unfortunate worksite tragedy. But those who had seen the crawl space firsthand told a different tale. They swore that the scratches on the walls were not from tools or animals. They were letters, carved in careful rows, spelling the same phrase over and over in a child's handwriting. He took them home. In the years that followed, the orphanage drew the attention of historians and paranormal investigators. A few dared to enter, but their recordings always failed. Tapes filled with static, cameras refusing to focus. Those who stayed after midnight reported hearing faint prayers echoing from beneath the floor, sometimes followed by the sound of a bell tolling once, far in the distance, where no bell tower stood anymore. In 1978, nearly 8 decades after the disappearance of the 12 orphans, St. Hildegard's was purchased once more, this time by a historian named Dr. Margaret Hensley. She had spent years researching the case, convinced that the official story of accidental fire and missing records was a convenient lie. Determined to uncover what truly happened, she moved into the decaying orphanage herself, bringing only her journals, a lantern, and a tape recorder. Locals warned her not to stay after dark, but she dismissed the rumors as superstition. Her notes from those first nights paint a chilling portrait of the building's strange vitality. She wrote of footsteps echoing in the halls when she was alone, doors that opened without wind, and the faint hum of a lullaby coming from the upper dormitory. By her second week, Margaret began uncovering clues that suggested deliberate concealment. Beneath the chapel's floorboards, she found fragments of ledger pages, names and dates hastily erased, replaced with identical initials, HM. The records were signed not by Father Alden, the last known caretaker, but by a man no one had ever mentioned before, Reverend Harold Moren. A letter found nearby, written in Latin, translated roughly to, "The chosen 12 have been sent to his house of silence." Margaret's research revealed that Reverend Moren was briefly assigned to St. Hildegard's during 1901, but was removed from church records soon after the disappearances. No record of his burial, resignation, or transfer existed. It was as if he'd been erased along with the children. One night in October, Margaret recorded what she described as an auditory manifestation. The tape captured the sound of a slow, rhythmic knocking beneath the floorboards. 12 knocks, one after another, then silence. She followed the sound to the eastern corridor, where the orphanage's nursery once stood. On the far wall, hidden behind rotted wallpaper, she discovered faint outlines. Handprints, small and uneven, pressed into the plaster. The next entry in her journal was brief and trembling. They are still here. 3 days later, her assistant arrived to find the front door ajar and the lantern still burning. Margaret was gone. The police searched the grounds, finding her tape recorder resting on the altar. The tape played for nearly an hour. Wind, distant humming, then a whisper. 12 for 1, 1 for 12. After that, static. Her disappearance reignited national interest. The site was declared unsafe and officially condemned, but investigators and thrill-seekers continued to break in. Some claimed to see a woman's shadow moving through the chapel with a lantern, her light flickering just long enough to reveal rows of children standing behind her, motionless. In time, the legend grew. The 13th soul, the one who sought truth, had joined the 12 who never left. And to this day, on cold October nights, locals say you can still see that flickering light drifting through the orphanage windows, as if someone inside is still searching for answers that were never meant to be found. As the echoes of St. Hildegard's fade into silence, one can't help but wonder, what truly happened in those shadowed halls? Were those 12 children victims of human cruelty? Or something far darker that defied the laws of reason and faith alike? History leaves behind bones and paper, but some stories refuse to rest. The orphanage still stands, half swallowed by time, and if you listen closely enough, you might still hear the faint hum of a lullaby drifting through its broken windows. If stories like this leave a chill in your chest, if you believe the past never truly dies, then stay with us. Subscribe and step deeper into the forgotten corners of history where truth and terror walk hand in hand. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened to the 12? Was it the work of a man of God, or something that even God turned away from? Every week we unearth another shadow buried beneath old earth and older lies. And who knows, the next mystery might just rewrite what we think we know about the past. Turn on the bell, keep the light low, and remember, some places aren't haunted by ghosts, but by the silence of those who were never found.